So somebody was asking recently about stripping down a retina, well it's not in this case, it's Schneider-Kreuznach Xenar f2.8 45mm lens, and I presume that they had intentions of using it on their retina reflex, which of course would work fine. This lens, unlike the 50mm Xenars used on the retina reflexes, was actually intended for use on the Kodak Instamatic Reflex camera, and that's why it's slightly different. That's why it's got this shorter focal length. That's not the only difference. I'll just zoom you out a bit. Here you might notice that there's this funny looking thing on the bottom of the lens. Well, that's actually intended to couple up with the aperture setting ring, and that's what that does, is that automatically sets the correct aperture or f-stop to suit your focus distance when you're using a flash. So that's what that little switch is about. So we can uncouple that from the f-stop range. So this lens itself, let's have a look at this. So how does it differ from the 50mm f2.8 lenses? Well, for a start, it's an entirely different design. It might look similar. The mount is certainly very much the same at the back of the camera. You have the two levers, same arrangement, but there's a big difference. The 50mm lens has helical focusing. The whole lens assembly moves backwards and forwards in the focus mount as you shift the focus lever. This one, if you look carefully, you'll see nothing happens here as I rotate the focus. Nothing shifts at all, and that's because this is a front cell focusing lens. Basically the only thing turning here is the front cell, which is turning in the body. The rear component is staying fixed. So it makes it quite a different kettle of fish altogether. So how do you go about getting into this one? Well, you certainly don't get in with a friction tool on this one. If you've used a friction tool, well, that probably got you nowhere at all. All you will have achieved is possibly rub some of the paint off. You might notice that here there's a little black bump. There's one on the opposite side here too. Now I thought that perhaps they were plugs or something. I couldn't understand what they were there for. Turns out you need a little hex driver, because they are a tiny little hex socket screw. And if I remove both of those, very careful not to lose them, I can tip out the name ring. They keep the name ring in place. Now, this is the only one of this size type of lens I have here, so I can't guarantee that they are all constructed in exactly the same way. If you strike one that does not have those screws in holding the name ring, it's quite likely that the name ring is simply glued in here. Probably got a couple of spots of glue to hold it in place. So what do we see from here on in? Well, there are three screw heads visible here, and they obviously hold something. Either they screw directly to the ring behind it and your focus adjustment is made there, or alternatively they will screw through to a ring at the back of the front element, so that the front element is effectively clamped between the focus scale ring we see here and its clamp at the back, so that as you rotate this, it turns the lens. It's one or the other. I haven't been in yet to find out. That's what we're about to do next. So those are the first points to notice anyway, that it's not the same sort of lens. The equipment at the back here for looking after the aperture and stuff That was almost certainly very much the same. Of course, there are no moving depth of field pointers. The depth of field scale is marked here on the rim at the back. Now that is a feature that was common to the 50mm f1.9 lens, that was made for use with the retina reflex as well. It didn't have moving aperture depth of field pointers, it just had a fixed scale. So I'll have to find a screwdriver now and open this up. Zoom you in a bit. Let's see what we can do. 3 screws. First thing I'm going to do is loosen them slightly. It wasn't tight. That one was. That one wasn't. So I can check now and see what happens. I want to see if this moves on the lens, whether it's clamping something. It doesn't appear to. There's a rattle there. You know, it's like it's fixed in permanently. So we'll just take those screws out. They're quite long. I can lift off the focus scale ring. I'm looking at it. This contains that switch mechanism. It looks a bit fancy, but these bright spots you see here are just little tags on this aluminium scale ring that have been bent over to hold it in place. Let's have a look at the lens itself. Well, it certainly does appear just to screw down to this piece at the front. Can unscrew this. This is unscrewing the whole front element. The grease is, it's obviously a synthetic grease, this, which means they'd moved on from the terrible sticky stuff they'd used with the retina cameras. And I don't immediately see how the lens, the front group, is held in place here. I'll have to probably clear all that grease away to have a look. The lens itself, what am I seeing here? It looks like this piece here is fixed into this ring. There's some lacquer or something similar around here. There's 2 holes here to engage a tool. So it looks like this would screw in. With that lacquer there, I'd certainly want to get rid of that lacquer with some acetone or something before I tried to unscrew that, but that certainly looks doable. So it looks like we've got effectively 3 components. It's constructed so there'll be a lens group at the rear, a lens group here in front of it, and this front group here that adjusts in and out to adjust your focus. Right, well, I'll get some acetone and I'll start cleaning things up. I must remove the majority of this grease first. When you have a front self-focusing lens like this, it's very useful to be diligent about removing grease, because otherwise it'll find its way onto the glass lens element and then you have a bugger of a job cleaning the glass. It just stays forever with smears. Right, that's that half. I'll pop that to one side. I want to look at this half too. What I'm looking for is some way that focus adjustment can be made. It does look like there's lacquer about here that had been used to fix things in place. It's possible that a component was screwed in, lacquered in place to fix the adjustment at that point, and that there is no easy way of making adjustments from the externally. I'm just looking at this to see what I can see. There's some roughness there which I took to be lacquer, but might actually be marks in the aluminium body. I can't tell whether this front ring screws in there. Can't say it looks particularly promising. So perhaps we don't have to disassemble that any further. If we haven't disturbed any focus settings, we won't have to worry about resetting the focus settings. It would simply be a case of starting this in the correct start position. It's a multi-start thread, of course, so there are probably, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, probably about a dozen start positions. So we pick the right spot, we should be good. I'll try some acetone around here, see if that lacquer shifts off around that lens. It certainly does. It's been quite thickly applied. This screw here will be the infinity stop position, and I'd see it's a bit loose. That just means that people have been twisting the lens hard up against that infinity stop position. Well, that's all the lacquer that's been splashed around on the outside. Of course, that's not the important part as far as unscrewing the lenses, because what I'll be more concerned about is what's between the flange of this body and wherever it's screwed into. It may be down in the thread, and probably is. might open the back of the lens up and check the arrangement at the back here first. Normally I would do that separately. If I was dealing with a 50mm lens, I would normally have the whole lens capsule out and then I'd deal with the stuff on the back. But there's no special reason we need to do it in that order. So I'll remove the 4 screws from the back. One of those 4 screws has red lacquer on it. That's the position that you would align with the red mark on the lens mount of the camera. Right, so if I lift off this rear piece, now interestingly here, this piece of the lens lifts off with the back cover. It's all coming off as a piece. That has the diaphragm in here, and these are our setting levers here, which I probably would have preferred not to have fly to little pieces. And interestingly, these work in this body, in this cavity here in the body. There's that post there, that screw we saw from the front. That's the extension of that screw. That'll be for where that return spring hooks up to. This piece sat over here somewhere. There. That's interesting. Okay, so we're into uncharted territory now. Lift off that, that's the top. That's the next one down there. That's very simple. Of course, there's no depth of field pointers to be shifted. That's all very simple. And I can look at the construction here. And what I can see is that this lens is certainly screwed into the body at this point. It looks like a relatively coarse thread. It does appear to be screwed down tight at this side. I don't think there's any need to get that lens out of there. We can get to both sides of it, so we can clean the glass on both sides. There's no special reason I can think of to wanting to remove that. So that part's relatively simple. Putting these components back in place should be relatively simple. I say that now. And then dropping this back in place, what do we have to achieve? Well, we'll have to achieve coupling up the aperture setting here with this tab. We don't have a shim here to worry about, so we don't have a shim to displace. The lens assembly here is held in with 3 screws from the back that would hold this clamp in place. And that clamp in turn would hold this piece here in place, which appears to be plastic. That holds the aperture blades in position. So if you remove these 3 inner screws here from the back, you could end up in deep trouble real quick because the diaphragm might come apart. Now there are 10 blades there. They're arranged in 5 sets. I can tell you from experience that assembling sets like that is entertaining, and I don't encourage you to make a mess, get in there and make a mess of that. If the diaphragm blades are really sticky, I think the best policy will be to remove the rear element here and then swab the blades gently with solvent from both sides repeatedly. You need to do it a lot of times to get the rubbish off there. Be a bit cautious. That component may or may not be plastic, or part of it might be plastic, but certainly you'd want to be sure that whatever you did on there, yeah, some of it's plastic, this piece is metal. Whatever solvent you used, you'd need to make sure it didn't affect that plastic, otherwise you would suddenly have a gooey mess and a ruined lens. Alright, I've probably seen about as much as I need to see in here, so I'll clean these lenses gently and then I'll reassemble it. And here, since we have no way of making any focus adjustment that I can see, oh yes we do. Okay, so what have we got here? Right, so here's our focus adjustment. Basically this piece is only a friction fit on there. So how would that work? This has the stop on it that goes up against that pin here. So this part serves as the physical stop for the movement. The lens is fixed to this component. So as you pull the screws up tight, it sandwiches this component. The focus scale ring is sandwiched between the lens and the outer ring at the outside. So you would get your focus correct, make sure your focus scale is set round to infinity, and then do the screws up. Alright, that's fairly straightforward, even I could do that. So I shall clean up my componentry and then show you how to reassemble it. Alright, well I'm about to attempt to reassemble these two mechanisms. Now this lever goes on here, that spring must hook over that brass post. So that's sat there like that. This piece sat on there like that. Now there's a notch. There's a notch here that aligns with a pin here. So that's how you can tell where the alignment is. What I have to achieve is I have to get this post into this slot here so that it can couple and open the diaphragm. That spring's quite strong. It depends whether I can easily achieve this because it'll almost certainly be under tension while I'm trying to get that rotated into position. If I can't achieve it, what I'll have to do is remove this rear lens group or element and I'll cheat. Now the standard cheat for tricks like this is that you open up the diaphragm manually, pop a cotton bud in from the back which effectively holds the aperture partly open, which releases the spring tension on it to a large extent so that you can get this lever in position to drop into the slot and then get it down onto the lens. So first I'll have one go without doing that, and if that fails then we're straight into cheating, because there are no prizes for No prizes for losing. See how I've got this. So that's going to go there. Yes. That tag's got to fit up into a point which is there. No, that missed it. I can tell it missed it because the aperture is not moving. And the lens is not even, the back of the lens isn't even seating. Let's have a look. No, we've got it. I think that's okay. That's good. Alright, so with that in position, I can pop my 4 screws back in position. Yeah, that's better. Just pop one in place there. I'm just checking the action of my levers, making sure that the diaphragm opens correctly. It does. You've got 4 screws. 3 of them are bright. One of them has red lacquer on it or paint. If you make a mess of one of the screw heads, if you slip with your screwdriver and bugger one of the screw heads up, the buggered screw head has just selected itself to be covered in red paint. So you would have to strip the paint off the previous red screw, use your buggered screw in that position, and then once a daub of red paint has been put on the head of it, all of your mistakes will have been hidden away. I'll just check the state of this. I've got to clean that rear lens element. It's I haven't bothered to clear it before because I expected to have to remove that. I have cleaned the inside of it. Oh yeah, it's quite dirty. I can see there's a small spot on the coating. That's neither here nor there. That's not uncommon. Right, to the front of the lens. This screws in anti-clockwise. Yeah, it's a left-hand thread. Now I have cleaned that lens, but it still looks a bit smeary. I did mention that grease tends to find its way onto every available surface and is exceedingly hard to get off glass to leave them in an unsmeary state. And that's not happening. I'm going to use a tiny drop of solvent, which should lift off any grease that's on the lens. And I will run that round that mount. Yeah, there certainly was grease in there. And then I'll clean that lens again. Any tiny smears you do get on a glass surface from that bit of oil contamination may look exciting, but they're probably not going to have any real effect on the lens as far as performance is concerned. Okay, so we have our components here. I'm going to apply a little bit of synthetic grease to the helical thread. As I said, it's a multi-start thread, but now I know the secret of the focus adjustment. It doesn't matter where it starts. So I've put half a dozen little spots around the outside of that thread. One last puff to make sure there's no dust in there. And start the thread. Alright, so that should just screw in. This component will go on next. It's got a stop in here which will go either side of that pin so that it can only move the focus scale over a limited range. Here we can adjust the position of the lens for the focus. So basically we just need to get this on the camera, check our focus, make sure the lens is correctly focusing at infinity, make sure that our focus scale ring here is set to infinity at the same point, drop in this piece from the front, fit and do up the 3 screws that hold it all together, and that will lock the front group and our focus scale and the adjuster ring at the front all together, and then all should be good. So that's what I've got to do. I'll pop that back on the camera body. And I will set the focus to infinity. And I have a suitable target out here. Got a split image in the viewfinder, of course. Makes it fairly easy to tell when you have things that are correctly focused. Okay, so the lens as it sits at the moment, that's correctly focused at infinity. I've just got to fit this ring in place at the infinity position, which will be at this end of its travel. There it is, that's just sitting there. So the lens is focused to infinity. Our focus scale ring is at the end of its travel at the infinity position. And we can pop our ring in place. And we have 3 long screws that hold that all together. Make sure I've got those holes lined up. I do not. That's better. See if our screw holes are lined up. That one is. That feels nice and smooth, much better than it was to start off with, even though it wasn't bad. I'm checking my focus again to make sure that nothing's shifted. No, that's good. So, our focus is correct. I can check those 3 screws. They're fine. Here's our name ring that goes on the front. And the tiny screws that held that in place. Now that size, I'll check this for you shortly. It looks like 0.9 millimeters, the size of the hex. So there we have it. Lens all back together, nice and clean. I didn't have to do anything with the diaphragm in this one, but had I had to, The only extra work I would have needed to do would be to unscrew this rear lens group here. There's two little slots there that hold that retaining ring. You'd undo that, pull that glass out so that you could get at both surfaces of the aperture blades to clean them if you needed to. Of course you'd have had to open it up from the front as well. So there you go. That's a Schneider-Kreuznach Xenar 45mm f2.8 lens, and these were made for the Kodak Instamatic Reflex camera. Thanks for watching.